Chapter 11. Amelia. I was awake before dawn. I could barely get any sleep. My mind kept lingering on what the lady had said about Damien. 11:30 a.m. I got down from the bed and rushed through the hallway trying to find Mrs. Gray's office, knowing that's exactly where she would be at this time of the day. I have had enough of her shits. Someone needs to stop her before she destroys everyone's lives. Amelia? The nice lady Mary called worriedly from behind as she spotted me running along the hallway like a crazy person. Stop. She said, trying to stop me, but was faster than her. I stopped on my tracks as my eyes landed on a door that had Mrs. Gray boldly engraved on it. I moved towards it and without giving a shit of what I was doing I stormed into her office nonchalantly. Stop. The nice lady warned, following me inside. She stood in front of me trying to prevent me from going any further. Please, stay out of this, I said. She started, but Mrs. Gray cut in. It's okay, Mary, she said, waving her off. She nodded and left the office. As soon as she left I took my eyes to Mrs. Gray. She was sitting comfortably behind her desk examining a file in her hand. What do you want, Miss Clark? She asked with a nonchalant expression written all over her face. Damien is blind. She dropped the file in her hand, her cold facial expression never changing. So I've heard? She answered emotionlessly. Why wasn't it in the contract? Why wasn't I informed about it? I asked. She leaned her head back against her chair with her cold eyes piercing me. Miss Clark, I am paying you very handsomely to carry my grandchild and not to waste your time probing on my son's visual acuity. She said coldly. I huffed shockingly. Oh. You're despicable. I spat, making her smirk grow wider. It all makes sense now why he didn't even look at me the last time I was here. Why he got furious when I mentioned the pregnancy. He's vulnerable to her just the way I am, and in his case it's far worse because he can't do anything about it even he wanted to. I don't know what's worse, being a prisoner or being a pawn by your own mother. I want to go home. I said, I've had enough of this family. In due time, Miss Clark, now out, I've prominent matters to attend to. She said, returning back to whatever she was doing. I stared at her, wondering how she could sit there and look so cold and emotionless about her own son. She groaned. Ms. Clark, I don't care if you're carrying a future heir. I could have you rudely thrown out of my office in a second. She said in an irritated manner, and without saying anything else to her, I scoffed and walked out her stuffing office, and suddenly feeling the tears coming up, but I managed to hold them back. Like Mary had said, I have to be strong. Crying isn't going to solve anything. I sucked in and strode along the hallway, giving myself a tour of the house, trying to keep my mind busy. I shifted my eyes to the left and spotted what seemed like a back door. I walked over to it and opened it. Luckily it was unlocked. I entered and was instantly greeted by a wide lawn that was extremely green, and surprisingly, there were some rose bushes as well. Who knew the devil was a fan of roses? Wow. I let out impulsively, quite short of words. Left for me, I would stay out here forever. My eyes landed on a beautiful fountain in the center of the yard. I gasped, walking towards it. I sat down and ran my hands in the water. It felt really nice. I was worried she killed you. A voice spoke up suddenly, making me jump to my feet. When I turned around, I was faced with an unfamiliar face. I am sorry. I saw you running along the hallway earlier, which was really hilarious, by the way. Who are you? Sorry, I am Lucas Reed. Damien's best friend. He said simply. I just nodded and turned my eyes back to the fountain. He could be an intruder for all I know. Silence. Amelia. I replied after a few seconds of silence. I could feel him smiling. Amelia. He repeated, making me lift my eyes to him. Well, Amelia, I was heading upstairs. Chapter 12. Amelia. I barely had enough time to object as he gripped the door handle firmly and pushed the door open. I was momently stunned by the brightness of the room. We entered further into the enormous room, and my eyes immediately landed on Damien, who was leaning against a window chair with his eyes closed and an earplug to his ear. He looked very calm and peaceful, unlike the last time I saw him. I am assuming it went well. He deadpanned in a curious voice. Not exactly. Lucas huffed. Shrugging his jacket, he tossed it on the bed and loosened his tie a little bit before glancing up at his wrist and cursing under his breath. Shit. I forgot to pick up Lily. he uttered, and without even an explanation or apology he rushed out the door, slamming the door behind him and leaving Damien and me completely alone. My day just got worse. Damien's eyes were still closed, meaning he had no idea I was standing in his room. "This is your only chance, Amelia." I placed my hand over my mouth to prevent myself from gasping out as I slowly began to tiptoe my way towards the door. Almost there. Almost there. "Where are you going?" My heart literally almost jumped out of my chest at the sound of Damien's voice. I held onto my chest and turned to see him still leaned back against his chair and his eyes were still closed. "How did—" I trailed off. "He cut me off. Sit," he ordered, fluttering his eyes open. I nodded, forgetting he couldn't see me. I made my towards the bed and sat the edge of it, far away from him. "I mean closer, Amelia," he said. I swallowed thickly and moved closer him. I really need to learn how to stop getting intimidated by the grays. I mean, feel like I would fall off my feet any minute from now. There was a small white sofa beside him. I quietly sat on it. There was a moment of defining silence in the room, like he was carefully analyzing his words. "How did you know I was the one?" "Your scent is exactly the same from last time," he said simply, like that wasn't weird at all. His eyes suddenly fell directly on mine. They looked lost, like they were staring out into space. I found myself sneaking small glances at him even though he clearly couldn't see me. He has the most beautiful set of eyes I have ever seen. They are hazel, mostly, but darkened to gray in correspondence to his mood. You could easily find yourself lost in them, like what you see. He spoke up all of a sudden, making me flinch. "How?" His slight smirk appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I am trained to know when people are watching me." "Huh?" was all I could manage to say. There are a lot of questions I would like to ask. Like, how he had the accident. Why he disappeared for so long. But I only settled for one. "Are you?" I trailed off, but he supplied the rest instantly, knowing exactly what I was about to ask. "Completely blind?" he completed. I nodded and almost facepalmed myself when I remembered he couldn't see me. "Why, yes," I stuttered. "Temporarily," he said with a huge smug on his face, enjoying how intimidated he made me feel. "Hasn't it been 2 years since the accident?" Silence. "How far along are you?" he asked out of the blue. "Barely 3 weeks," I answered, instantly being reminded of the last time we had this conversation. I pray he doesn't lash out at me again. I could barely get over the last one. "Can I touch it?" he asked. I let out. Before I could properly register what he meant, I saw him scrambling to his feet and feeling the sofa for support as he reached over to me. He kneeled beside me and began tracing his hand up my body until he spotted my stomach. Without even the slightest hesitation, he slid his left hand underneath my shirt and began running circles on my stomach, sending false signals to my entire body. "Did you feel that?" he whispered, still running his hand on it. What?" I rumbled like an idiot. He chuckled, shaking his head. "For a second I thought I felt something," he said. "It's a bit early for that." "I figured," he whispered before going completely silent, his chilly hand where still underneath. Chapter 13. Amelia. "That's nice, Mom," I said to my mom over the phone. She was telling me how the money I sent over the weekend had paid almost half of the debts we owed. It's nice hearing her happy voice again. "When are you coming home, Mija?" she asked after a while. "Soon, Mom," I whispered. "I just have to finish up some work with the grays first." I lied, but if we look at it, wasn't exactly a lie. I was working. "Okay, be careful," she said, but a little sadness voice was imminent in her voice. "Bye, Mom," I said finally and hung up. I told myself I wasn't going to cry anymore, but it gets harder every day not to do so. I have had to lock myself in the room, since Damien used me to prove his long-pending suspicion, which is I am a slut only after the gray money. He didn't exactly say it in words, but the way he snubbed me right after, I didn't need a genius to tell me that's what he was thinking. I don't blame him. I can hardly even recognize myself lately. Sighing, I got down from the bed and stepped into the bathroom to splash water on my face. I took a few seconds and stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering what people see when they look at me now. Silence. Sighing, I turned off the tap and walked out of the bathroom, ready to face the day ahead of me. Hopefully, This time I won't make a complete fool of myself. I opened the door and was momently dazzled on how bright the room appeared now, smiling halfly. I tugged my sweater tightly around my body and made it out of the room to the kitchen, where Mary had her back leaned against the kitchen counter, lost in thoughts. Are you okay? I asked, sitting at the dining table. She lifted her eyes from the rim of her coffee cup to look at me. Yes. She answered instantly, bringing her cup of coffee closer to her lips. Have you by any chance seen my daughter Nina anywhere? She asked, and I couldn't help the shock that appeared on my face. You have a daughter? She chuckled. Yes, not my proudest moment sometimes. I am sorry, it's just I wasn't aware you had any family besides the Grays. She sinks into her cup of coffee and shook her head. It's normal for you to think that, since I have spent half of my years with the Grays. She said with a smile before her voice turned serious. That's a discussion for another day. I made omelette. She said, reaching out and placing a plate of omelette in front of me. I smiled. Mom. A blonde girl walked into the dining room. Who's the new girl? She asked as her eyes landed on me. Amelia. I answered, making her mouth gasp wide open. You are. She started, but Mary cut her off with a growl. That's enough, Nina. At least now I know how people see me. She rolls her eyes at her Mary and seats beside me. I am Nina. She said, stretching her hand to me. Amelia. I replied with a smile, shaking it back. She smiles. We are gonna have so much, Amelia. She squeals, and I swallowed a lump in my throat before nodding with a half smile. Okay. After breakfast, Nina and I sat at the fountain and talked about almost everything, but mostly about the Grays and how cliched they are. She's really something. I could already picture the rest of the months getting tolerable with her around, especially Kim. She said, snapping me out of my reverie. Who's Kim? I asked. Oh, I am sorry, of course, you don't know who she is. You should be thrilled you don't. She's the worst. She said, rolling her eyes. I mean, she acts all nice around the Grays but a complete bitch to everyone else. She went on and on about the Kim girl, driving up my curiosity. Nina. I whispered, making her stop and look at me. I raised an eyebrow at her. Oh, sorry again. Kim is Damien's fiancée. She's a model in New York or something. She said with some other things I couldn't grasp. Damien is engaged.